Hey everybody, this is Weeble again. I'm going to do a tabletop review of HK91 and clones. This particular one here is in Springfield Armory SAR8. So we'll get started, kind of do a review. These things have been around a long time. Came out in the 50s and 60s. Oh, lots of countries adopted them. Probably 50 or 60. If they didn't have an FAL, they probably had a G3, which is a similar thing except full auto. We'll go over some of the high points and some of the lower points of this. I like to start out though, if you're an M1A guy or an FNFAL guy or even an AR-10 guy, you'll know what I'm talking about. When 308, a lot of power, a lot different to shoot than like an AR or something like that. So, this particular gun is one of my favorites. So, just the size, the weight, and the power, I guess, are something I really enjoy. It's fun. One of the things that I think is really neat or forward thinking, this is probably one of the first firearms that was modular. And a lot of that gets bounced around, a lot of ARs are this or that. But you have to remember that this is virtually unchanged since, the 1960s. They changed virtually nothing on these things. And I can take any stock, changing the stock on this is as simple as one pin. Like that. And you've got a new stock. This one here is one with the bipod, obviously. The bipod itself is also removable. It doesn't have to be on there. It's removable and it folds. If I can get it on there. There we go. So yeah, modular, front stock, rear stock. You could have rails on here if you wanted to. I wouldn't. It makes a fairly heavy gun heavier. There's spots in here that are pressed and ground, so you can put a scope on here if you'd like to. They're a little bit unpleasant with the scope. It gets pretty high, but it does work and it is there. So yeah, so modular for its time, especially for its time. The sad part is it's a dated platform. The NATO and most of the free world's moving away from 308 battle rifles to 223 5.56. So as modular as this is, it's not being currently supported. So I guess what I'm saying is people generally aren't making too much new stuff for it. That said, I find it interesting that the German Army in the precision rifle program found out that their HK, was it 417, wasn't doing as well as it should have been, and the German Army went and dusted it off these things and put a good scope on them, and they were using them for their designated marksman. That says something that, 50-year-old design, and it's still out there in combat. That goes to another point here. They are accurate, and that gets used a lot too. But these have a free-floating barrel. I mean, as much stuff that looks like it's going on here, this isn't a gas tube. This technically up here is not attached or touching the barrel, or it shouldn't be. So that and high-quality barrels. These things are typically, even a rack grade HK91 should be 1.5 inches gun. With some hand loading, you can probably even do better. Magazines for these things. This one here is aluminum. They also make steel. I don't have too much of an opinion on any of them. I think the steel's a little bit more rugged, but these are so cheap. You know, if you could find them $3, $4 a piece, you know, that's pretty good deal. And they're all GI, or you know, German surplus, so they're not some crappy Tapco mag or something like that. These are surplus. This, I find it interesting. They're all date stamped, so you can look on the bottom and see when they were manufactured. Like this one here is 4 of 1990, so fairly recent. You see a lot of them that are older, made in the 60s. They all function fine. They're made exactly the same. So, but that's a definite plus to the rifle. You know, cheap accessories, cheap magazines. The German Army went away from these in the 90s. They surplused a lot of the rifles, so that's kind of a benefit to us. We get the surplus rifle parts, and if not the whole rifle, a lot of surplus parts. The slings on these I really like. This one here is just kind of a simple leather one. They make a web sling too that's excellent. At the time, this is kind of one of those weird things where HK made the guns and they made the stuff that went on them, and it was all good stuff. So yeah, there again, you know, buy a sling, $3-4 from Robert RTG. Robert RTG's got a lot of HK stuff, a lot of good stuff for reasonable prices. So, you know, that's nice. For me, I think these things have kind of the sweet spot for barrel length, 18 inches. You know, it could be longer, it might be beneficial, but, and then you get into, you know, it's not as handy. It's a nice size. These things are manageable. They're not like an M1A with a full-length barrel, or an FNFAL with a full-length barrel. 18 inches, I think, is a pretty good compromise. I guess some of the cons for these, I guess, would be, you know, you always hear about it. It's hard on brass. It slings brass about 50 yards off to the right and forward. You can get a port buffer for these. I don't reload, and it you know, if you do that, it can be done, but I don't reload. And realistically, these things shoot steel case pretty well. I've shot wolf and silver bear, and 308. I think that stuff is pretty good for a rifle like this. Doesn't seem to bother it. Functions fine. Another thing that might be considered a minus is the safety. It's AR-15-ish, meaning it's same principle, safe fire, but you have to have thumbs like ET to reach it or shift it how you hold the rifle. So yeah, I guess it gets a little bit of a knock for that. Also, some people complain about having to reach forward and pry that up. I don't think it's that bad. It's not as easy to pull as an FNFAL, but you get used to it. Let's see. Yeah, there, you know, in any of the 308s, whether it's FAL or M1A, G3, they're all going to be a little heavy. This one isn't any heavier than most, but that 9 pounds right in there. Depending on how you kit it out, you know, it's going to weigh a little more, a little less. You know, like this bipod here, that's got to be a pound, and if you don't need it. I guess if you didn't want to use the bipod and a scope, or you didn't want to use the bipod, I think the thin, slimline handguard is the way to go. This heats up a little bit after you shoot a lot, but it's still, for some reason, it's a lot lighter, a little more pleasant, I think. And one thing, if you ever do get an HK pattern rifle, you're going to want one of these. They're like $50. It's your sight adjustment tool. It's got these two little fingers in there, and you can see in your sight drum here, you put it in there, snap that in there, and then spin the drum, and that's how you change your settings for elevation. It's almost something I suspect is done at the armorer level, and you know, it's not something you're going to do on the fly. that said, once you get it zeroed in, it's got different settings for 100, 2, 3, 4, and you can get that by turning. And you can't mess it up. I mean, you go either way, up, down, left, left, right, whatever. You're not actually changing anything in the setting, you're changing the aperture itself. So kind of GI proof, I guess. If these things were sighted in by an armorer and released to the soldiers, why they're not going to get too sideways with it. The windage is adjusted with a Phillips screw. Not too bad. So I guess with that said, we'll have to do a field strip on it. There's 2 buttons on the side that are not captive. You take them completely out. There's 2 holes in the back of the buttstock here. That's what that's for, is to hold that. It's your recoil spring and buttstock. And this is your trigger group. You don't have to shoot them much and they're dirty. But with that said, they're like a pile driver. They run and run and run and run, even though they're dirty. The not so fun part is trying to clean down in there in your trunnion and barrel area. It sucks. There's no way about it. The good news is it doesn't matter. It can be dirty. I mean, I've shot this thing probably at one setting or over the series of a couple days, 1,000 rounds without cleaning it. And to these guys that complain that they're a little bit recoil adverse, they don't like the kick of a G3. Ironically, if you let the thing run, get a little dirty, it seemed to kick a lot less. You guys that are AR guys, that are neat freaks, would not like this gun. It's just a filthy pig. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. They're delayed blowback, so what's happening is you're getting some of that residual pressure blown into the action, and it makes it dirty. It's your bolt carrier, bolt head. Give it a quarter turn to get that off. Another 3/4 turn to get that off. That's your locking piece. Spring-loaded firing pin. That's a good thing. There's also this thing here that actually was developed to keep the bolt from bouncing. Keeping you from having an auto battery. Reassembly is the same way. There's a few different ways to do this. Once you do it a few times, it's not so bad. The trick is to kind of get it slid on and forward with the rollers depressed. Another way that you can do it is if you get it together and it's stuck with the rollers out and you're fighting with it, you can't make it work. You can put it back in the receiver like that and give it a good whack, and that sets the rollers back in and you can put it back together. I've heard that's the way the German army does it. I don't know. I've never been in the German army, so I don't know. But and adhere to the trigger pack too, just to if you do need to field strip it more. And that all comes out. And that's one of the beauties of this system too, is for some reason you want to upgrade your trigger to a target trigger or something like that, it's that easy. Take that whole trigger pack out, put it back in. Trigger parts in it are pretty robust. I have never heard or seen anything failing. Yeah, that's your ejector. Bipod folds up if you're not using it. Kind of heavy, but it does work and it's rugged. So that's the basic parts of it here. On a side note, when you're shooting, I've seen a lot of people do this, and in typical German fashion, it will punish you for doing it wrong. There's a certain sight picture, and it shows them in most of the manuals, that you're supposed to be able to see with this system. It's called a diopter system. And to do that, you'd be right about here. You want just a little bit of light around that peephole and the hood of your front sight. I see so many people do this, and that makes them hate HKs. And they'll creep up on it and put their cheekbone right there. Well, guess what comes back there? The bolt carrier recoil. And it punishes you, punches you right in the cheekbone. So that's your punishment for not listening to the Germans that designed the rifle, is a swift kick to the face. You hold it back like you're supposed to and how it's intended to be used, it's just fine. You do it wrong, it's going to punch you in the cheek. So, word of the wise there. Typical engineering for the Germans. It's their way or the highway. One other special treat we've got here to show you. Oh my gosh. Is German night vision. This little beauty was from Sportsman's Guide. Came with this nice heavy-duty case, spot to hold your batteries. Oh, but it is heavy. Let's see here. Interestingly, it came with a mount for obviously a G3, the German Army rifle, but it also came with a mount for a Panzerfaust rocket launcher, in case you want to put your night vision on your Panzerfaust. So any scope or this night vision attaches with this style of claw mount. Let's see here. Just like that. Instant way to turn a 9-pound rifle into about a 15-pound rifle. So, this was made by Zeiss. Although they're allegedly first generation night vision, it's got 3 tubes in it, like cascading tubes they call it, and it actually isn't too bad for, I paid $300 or $400 from Sportsman's Guide. Yeah, I'm fairly impressed. As little as I use it, it seems to work. don't think you're going to do any offhand target shooting with it, but yeah, it's nothing else an interesting piece of history, but it works. So you see what I'm saying here, when things get a little tall, get on that claw mount. That said, things usually stay fairly well zeroed. And they're easy to take on and off. So, I guess that's all we got about this one. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to do so. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.